Hey, welcome to the second episode of my analysis of Persona 4 Golden. I wonder about that name for it, an analysis, I guess. In a way, I'm analyzing Persona 4 Golden, of course, but I'm also using Persona 4 Golden to analyze other things. I just want to mention that. I know you probably were aware of that, but just wanted to mention. Episode 2. Before going upstairs, check out some stuff around the house. By the way, in another gesture of reflexivity, I really like how the show on the TV is a quiz show. One of the games you can play from the start screen in Persona 4 is a game where you're on a quiz show and have to answer questions about the game which you'd only know from attentive previous playthroughs. So you head upstairs and make yourself at home as Dojima suggested, and in a minute or two you're going to go to bed nearly immediately and find yourself in a foggy landscape where you're walking on the TV screen equivalent of a cobblestone path, where instead of stones it's red screen TVs. There are also some above you looking like light fixtures. It's going to seem that you're now watching this on a CRT TV, as evidenced by the flickers of light and trembling signals that wrinkle the surface of your own personal screen. The red I see basically as a kind of violent spin on a yellow bricked road. You're like Dorothy, on your way to an adventure in a land full of sublimated alternative versions of people in your everyday life, since that's what the unreal psychological realm throughout the game will be. You're enveloped in a fog that's also static, bringing together the conceits of weather and television as the frames for our days. This is also the moment in the game where you do battle for the first time and get to experiment with attack, guard, and some skill point moves like Zio. You can't quite make out who it is you're fighting. We'll get to the fight in just a minute or two, and at a certain moment you'll see that you lose the ability to strike the opponent at all. I'd like to single out this moment as an especially dreamlike or true to the experience of dreams kind of thing. Sudden impotence following a strikingly natural flood of possibility or new powers. Dreams, of course, can be regarded as wish fulfillment, and I'm inclined basically to think they almost always are. Of course, some of our wishes may frighten us, or the contorted articulation of the wish serves to spare us the pain of claiming some desires as our own. In other words, even though dreams are wish fulfillment, that doesn't mean every dream makes us feel happy. Leaving aside for a second the possibility that this dream of yours is actually a brief passage into another realm, related to spirituality or some transcendent encounter with the divine or supernatural via the gas station attendant, and assuming that this dream is, maybe, wish fulfillment, what wish could you possibly be realizing here? Well, the fact you're fighting leads me to believe that there's some expression of hostility here, which makes sense. Although the protagonist is being pointedly polite, appropriately performing in his role as guest in his hosting relative's house. He's also, of course, in a new place, lost in a shroud of circumstances beyond his own choosing. His parents are gone across gray waters, leaving him alone, probably red with anger, and he doesn't at all know what could possibly be ahead. Remember, just before entering Dojima's house, he thinks for a moment that he'll be spending the next year here, and there are any number of asides wondering what the next few months will bring. One wish fulfillment interpretation of this dream might be that it's an expression of your anger at wandering through a clouded new world, advancing along a bridge of anger, doing battle with someone, which is cathartic in some ways, although as shown by the period where your attacks no longer do damage, there's a realization here that these expressions of anger have no effect, they won't actually change anything. This too, by the way, may be a kind of wish fulfillment. The protagonist wants to express his anger at the world, his parents, maybe even Dojima, and yet he wants to suffer no consequences for his anger. He doesn't want to actually hurt the scapegoat toward which he directs his rage because of a self-preserving impulse, which is also the source of his social poise and polite disposition. You wake from this dream, and Nanako makes you breakfast. Again, I'm struck by her assuming what must be the heavy mantle of premature maturity, if I can even say that, the way in which she prepares a meal and provides some steadying routine for others when she must be longing for that support herself. It seems on some level that she gains footing or solidity by identifying with you. Notice, for example, how she points out that your school and her school are on the same way, so wouldn't it make sense to go there together? One of the only things she knows about you is that you're without your parents. She, with her mother having passed on and her father nearly always at work, therefore always away, knows exactly how you feel, and I feel she must imagine you too might extend an informed sympathy toward her. It's a touching moment. It's raining today, and you and Nanako find yourselves on a road through the floodplain bearing umbrellas. She parts ways and says goodbye again, with the plain-spoken directness that suggests a commanding practicality, which all, of course, belies her vulnerability. You head on to your school, and as you make your way, Yosuke, whose name you don't know yet, rides his bicycle until he wipes out off-screen. By the time we approach him, his bicycle's knocked over and he's jumping up and down, holding his crotch. A few things are revealed here. The first is the primary tonal associations we'll make with Yosuke moving forward. Kind of juvenile carnality, hence the crotch hold, suffused with a bumbling sense of failure, following overconfidence or casualness. Another thing that's revealed here is the manner in which derailment leads to introduction. People crash into each other's lives, and it's only through Yosuke's accident that we come to notice him. Another thing, and this ties in only on a marginal level with the emergent central drama of the newscaster-politician-entertainer love triangle. Erotic cores and misadventure, injury, are practically magnetically bound to collide. You may have noticed you paused before the school much as you did before Dojima's house, anticipating and wondering what kind of student life awaits you here. Now we have a nice panoramic glimpse inside the classroom, which seems in any number of ways stereotypical. Students malingering, gossiping, chatting, one Yosuke with his head on his desk. We just overheard a conversation about the dreaded homeroom teacher, Moroka, otherwise known as King Moron, who will soon be ponderously presiding over the class. This sets up a recurring theme in Persona 4, which is amplified in Persona 5, of course, namely that adults who revel in their power over the young are corrupt and pitiful figures. Indications of prestige or authority are so often hollow gestures that we'll see over time very shortly how assiduously Yukiko deflects her own positions of privilege as the daughter of a well-off family and much lauded and fussed over young woman in class. Maybe because she implicitly knows that anything that seems to give you power over another person is false, falsifying, corrupting, and hollows out all that might otherwise be substantial in you. It's good, generally, by the way, to be wary of power, wary of loudmouth assertions of authority, in short, wary of doing exactly what King Moron does in this classroom. It's also worth emphasizing here that, King Moron is very ugly. Calls to mind an idea that originated with the person people think of as the original psychologist, Aristotle. Namely, the idea that what you look like signals how you are as a person, that your physical state, your body, your face, your visage, your posture, all of these reveal an inner state. Now, to a certain obvious extent, I don't agree with this, of course. But, and here's where Aristotle's position as a first psychologist comes in, there is an extent to which the physical body is the medium through which the soul or psyche shares its story. If I slouch all the time, it may very well be because I feel obligated to make myself smaller. So over time, my hunch, seen in my ostensible form, becomes a representation of some inner slinking away or some down impulse. On a smaller, but more literally legible or graspable level, the face undoctored has smile lines, laugh lines, frown lines. The look of your face indicates whether you smile often, frown often, laugh often. The body is the medium through which the soul or psyche shares its story. In depicting King Moron as a lecherous, lascivious, ill-mannered, ugly-minded, buffoonish bully, and in depicting him as being truly ugly and off-putting in his physical form, Persona 4 cosigns this Aristotelian outlook. Not to linger on this too long, but this bond between one's inner state and their outward presentable material body and self is the basis of modern psychology. It certainly was essential to that other scientist, Freud, who inherited from Aristotle not only the idea of the body expressing something the soul originated. Freud famously said that when the patient is silent, his fingertips speak. This is where we get the age-old cinematic image of someone with something to hide drumming their fingers or biting their nails. Freud and Aristotle also shared a fascination with eels. Aristotle couldn't figure out where they came from, what their whole deal was, and one of Freud's earliest jobs as a scientist in training was to cut open a bunch of eels trying to find their reproductive organs. I kid you not, this is totally true, for what it's worth. Anyway, the story gets off to a quick start, with King Moron and all the other teachers suddenly being called together by an ominous message over the PA system. Something's afoot, a phrase that comes to mind as intuitively here as it would in a murder mystery, toward which it's clear this game is wending. Students now start gathering around the windows, remarking on the fog. This is another great moment, indicating the porousness of the boundary between your inner world and external reality. It's a magical feeling, and it almost calls to mind the ecstatic anxiety of, say, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. The idea that one's inner world is determinative of the outer world, and that one's energies, perceptions, and impulses, all these passionate intangibles, can shape material reality. This is a description of magic, of course. It's also a description of culture, art of any kind. You know, we kind of have a moment here before the next significant thing happens. So I just want to take this moment to return briefly to that idea of physiognomy, the idea of the physical self reflecting the soul. I just want to say that this idea of one's appearance being linked to one's inner self, it was also a great subject for one of the men I believe to be one of the greatest video game critics of all time, Montaigne, who wrote in his great third volume of essays in a piece called On Physiognomy. He wrote the following: "It grieves me that Socrates, who was a perfect pattern of all great qualities, should, as reports say, have had so ugly a face and body, so out of keeping with the beauty of his soul, seeing how deeply he was enamored of beauty, how infatuated by it. Nature did him an injustice. There is nothing more probable than that the body conforms and is related to the soul. I cannot say often enough how much I value beauty as a quality that gives power and advantage. We have nothing that gives a man better credit." Anyway, just wanted to give you that Montaigne quote. I love it so much. Anyway, at this point, the students are detecting menace and goading themselves into a frothy irritation over the possibility of real-life danger in their small town. They're talking among themselves and urging each other outside to see what's going on. You are a little bit slower to head out. You're probably still mulling over the events of the past few days and maybe still recovering from the illness given to you by that gas station attendant who shook your hand and sent you into that foggy dreamscape. You linger at your desk and are met by a short-haired girl and a black-haired girl, Chie and Yukiko. They balance each other well, one forthright, unpretentious, salt of the earth, chummy without being obsequious. The other is proper, diplomatic to a fault, self-possessed, and reserved in a manner that reminds one of the self-protective charms and appeals of circumspection. They invite you to walk with them, seemingly in a spirit of good fellowship, an extension of a social branch to the new kid, the transfer student in their class. And this is nice of them. On the way out, though, you run back into Yosuke, who got into that bike accident this morning. He presents himself to Chie, apologizing for having cracked something else in half. Again, misadventure, misuse of a device, foolishness, error. He runs away. She's gonna run after him in a second, and we see him again holding his crotch. Twice in the space of a few minutes, I'd point out. This serves to further confirm the connection between Yosuke, humiliating failure, and erotic pain. He's jumping up and down in male pain. And it turns out that DVD that he cracked that belonged to Chie was Trial of the Dragon, presumably a martial arts film, one of a genre that epitomizes and valorizes great physical competency and tangible heroics, implementable techniques that take the body as a weapon and a shield. This, by the way, loops back a little to our dream last night of fighting against an unseen opponent in that gray, fuzzy world. Conflict, erogenous zone pain, misadventure, porous boundaries. These are the operative concerns only a few minutes into the game. As you leave the school, a strange boy, one who's not even from your school, comes up to Yukiko and accosts her in one of the worst ways, presuming over-familiarity, addressing her by a nickname, which is odd anywhere at any time, but for cultural reasons, a particularly conspicuous faux pas in the world of this game. A few students overhear the approach and allude to the Amagi challenge. Apparently, Yukiko is so elusive and hard to get a beat on, so deliberately removed from the turbulent world of the desires of high school dating, that nobody can ask her out and succeed. Certainly, this strange new student doesn't succeed, and he runs off aggrieved and leaving a fog-like vapor of creepiness in his wake. Again, a great hallmark of a murder mystery. Early on, issue a number of red herrings, people who seem creepy or odd or a little maliciously strange just to make sure our ears are perked and that our minds are suspicious of everyone. Yosuke takes his bike, and you'll see in a moment before riding off, he mentions that Chie and Yukiko shouldn't be too hard on the new kid, which, again, is you. Chie responds that they're just curious, which raises to me an interesting point. Is there such a thing as real kindness? These two students seem to be making a kind gesture and wanting to spend time with you, walk you out of the building, get to know you a bit, but what's their real motivation? At the end of the day, is there such a thing as a purely altruistic gesture? Even when we perform a kind deed, can't you say that we're doing so only to think of ourselves as a good, selfless person, which in turn satisfies a selfish urge to think highly of oneself? And taking the new kid aside under their wing, isn't that a way for Chie and Yukiko to feel themselves maybe powerful at the school? Maybe the idea of establishing proximity to a kid from a city makes them feel cultured, offers them an escape from the hermetic life of the town, and they're talking to you just for the cheap thrill of vicarious distance from what they know. This is a bit of a facile hypothetical, of course, although if you're actually interested in this question, I highly recommend the Adam Phillips book, Kindness. Anyway, it's a facile line of thinking, of course, but I bring it up because the game will actively consider the shadow motivations that underlie what we take to be socially constructive behavior. The twisted impulses that result in ostensibly good action is a core subject for Persona 4. Chie starts talking to you about Yukiko, about how her inn is famous in town, about how she'll probably take it over one day, about how she's popular at school, though she's never had a boyfriend, and about how the town has almost nothing to offer. About how she's surprised your reason for being here is as boring as it is, your parents traveling for work. And she asks if you think Yukiko is cute. The options you're presented with here will essentially serve to differentiate you both from the creepy kid from an unknown school and from the accident-prone Yosuke. You can directly answer and say, sure, yeah, without presuming excessive familiarity, without putting your foot in your mouth in some pity-eliciting gesture like Yosuke's when he asks if Yukiko is concerned about him. You can basically present yourself as someone with the clarity of dispassion, acknowledging and communicating feelings without having your bearing contort under the pressure of anxiety. In other words, you're cool. You're a Persona protagonist, infinitely more psychologically aware than your peers. Yeah, and it's really, really good to be a Persona. It's really, really good to be a Persona protagonist. You know, you're just very classically cool, calm, and collected. Anyway, eventually Chie says you haven't said a word and then interrupts herself to go over to what looks to be a crime scene. Dojima comes out and it's clear that something's up. You also, I have to say, comport yourself pretty well here. It's never easy, they say, to mix friends and family as a young person, and that problem's only compounded when you're new in town and presumably have any number of illusions to maintain. You have to be strategic. That's kind of how the basic line of thinking goes, and how you present yourself to others. You want other people to see you in a certain light. You want to control how they see you. And so, to do that, you basically keep people separated so you can keep your story straight. That's how it often is as a teenager. You pretend to be more mature than you are, so you keep your friends on whom you strain to impress your maturity away from your parents or guardians who know you at your worst, most dependent, and least mature. But as the protagonist of Persona 4, you don't really have to worry about stuff like this. You're the same person around Chie and Yukiko as you are around Dojima. And since we've already established that Chie and Yukiko are kind of into the idea of you being a city kid with a bit of mystique, the fact that you're also the nephew of the local detective only serves to make you cooler, cloak you in the mantle of intrigue. That's kind of the power trip of Persona games. If Spider-Man makes you feel like Spider-Man and Batman makes you feel like Batman, then Persona games make you feel like a emotionally mature teenager. Interrupting this moment of cool immaturity with a Yosuke-like ineptitude, patheticness, and crass assailability is some inferior of Dojima's, a colleague who runs on and off screen to throw up. Such is his weakness. Dojima scolds Adachi, and the two of them return to the crime scene. Chie says that maybe you should all go to Junez some other time, and instead, maybe for now you'll just go home. Which of course makes sense. As we established at the end of the last episode, Junez is the place for repeatable comforts, the stabilizing indulgences of the regular, everyday, orderly, controlled. Today is certainly a day of aberrance, a day of surprises, a day of changes. A new student at home, a new student at school, a crime that disturbs the pace of the day and the calm of the town. And with that, thanks for tuning in to the second episode. See you guys for the third.
We're taking off. Starting tomorrow, neighbor, let's do our best.